I'm recording my homily for the 13th Sunday in Ordinary Time. This is actually in some ways my first Sunday. This is my first Sunday in my new assignment. And I am currently at a place called Priest Point. And anytime you have a place named after a priest, I can't resist, right? Being a priest. I wanted to record this down on the waterfront because this is Priest Point, the point of the water. But it was all taken up by private property, and so there was really no way for me to do it without breaking a few laws. So I figured today I'll stick to public property. So where I'm at is actually a cemetery, a very old cemetery for the Tulalip tribe on Priest Point. And the reason it's named Priest Point is because it's honoring the first priest, Catholic priest, who came to the Tulalip tribe and served the people here for many years in the 1800s. And the story has it that he came ashore right here at Priest Point and built, I believe it was the first church. I might be wrong on that. I'll have to double check on that. But the actual church itself now, St. Anne's, is one bay down, just on the other side of the bay. And I'm sure I'll record some of my homilies over there because the church is right on the water and it is very beautiful there too. Anytime a new priest comes in, and so I'm praying for the intercession of the first priest who was here, we learn that there are certain ways to engage people, or there's good ways to do it and there's not so good ways to do it. And so my homily is going to talk a little bit about that. One of the things that I've been just praying about coming here to St. Mary's in Marysville and St. Anne's in Tulalip, it's the fact that all of us in some ways are going through some grieving. And so I'm grieving leaving the people whom I was serving in the Skagit Valley. I'm still grieving leaving the people in Lakewood. And so coming here, I kind of bring that with me. And the people too, themselves, they're grieving. They're grieving losing their priest and the relationships that they formed. And for children, that can be actually hard because for children to have the relationship with the priest is a fantastic thing. But then to just have it cut off, it doesn't seem natural. It's hard for children to understand that process. And you've all heard of the 5 stages of grief, right? And so the first stage of grief is denial. And then the second stage is anger. And the third stage is bargaining. The fourth stage is depression. And then the fifth stage is acceptance. And it'd be nice if we could just skip right to that fifth step. But often our humanness gets in the way. And if you listen to the first 4 steps carefully, denial, anger, bargaining, and depression, in some ways they all speak of a fear. There's a fear of losing something that we had that was good. And so building a relationship is I don't want to say it's like hard work, but it comes over the course of time. It deepens over the course of time. And so to lose that then can impel us to fear, to say, well, one, I don't want to give it up. I want to cling to it. And so I want to resist anything that's going to ask me to give up something good that I have. And that's in fear. But then there's also a fear of looking to the future and fearing that maybe I won't have that. Like for a parish, maybe the next priest will be, maybe the next priest coming in, who is this guy? Who is Father Peter? Is he a good guy? Is he a jerk? Whatever, So there's a fear there. So the readings, I think, lend themselves to talk about Jesus' solution to that. That I would put it as there's 5 steps of grief. There's 3 steps of building a new relationship, building something new. And so that's not fear, that's rooted in hope and love. And so the 3 steps are, one is, we see it in the first reading today with Elisha. So Elisha is is a prophet who is residing, he's living with a married couple at this particular moment in the story. And this husband and wife are older and they have no children. And so they're barren. And so Elisha comes in and you know, as a priest, I know when I'm speaking with couples that really want to have children but really struggling and it doesn't seem to be happening, it's all consuming. It taints everything. It overflows into everything. And it even begins to poison some of their relationships with others, especially others who have children. And there can be resentments and all those things. And so Elisha, I'm sure, coming into this situation would have known right away that this was something that weighed heavy on the heart of this husband and wife. But he doesn't immediately try to solve the problem. He doesn't go to work, in other words, immediately. He allows the relationship to form. And so I think that's the first thing that's very important anytime we're doing something. So if we're a boss for a company, or if we're just a family, or moving into a new neighborhood, whatever it may be, is to really work hard to build relationships, to get to know people and to listen to them. And I'm not always the best one to do that. I really want to just go to work. I want to solve problems. You know, that's the engineering side of me. I want to fix things. And when I do that without first building a relationship, I just end up making things worse. And I've done that in the past. And so coming into this new assignment, I really want to embrace something that Jesus did really well. And so Jesus would go into communities and he would notice people, and he would notice the people often who are broken, the people who are sinners, the people who are not well, the beggars, the people who are abandoned. He would notice them. And he would build relationships. And he did that also with the apostles and the disciples. He didn't just go in and start working and preaching. He first built some relationships. He constructed the 12. He built the community of disciples. And then he went to work. And so that's the first thing for us to remember, is to build relationships with people. And then we can get to the second stage. So the second stage, St. Paul talks about today in the second reading. And he talks about baptism and the surrender to baptism, the surrender to dying with Christ. There's a gentleman here in this community in Tulalip, and I was just doing a little research online. I just wanted to learn a little bit more about some of the people here. And he's a leader in the community, and every picture I found of him, he's wearing a crucifix around his neck, and a big one. And I thought that was beautiful because he was the only one in those pictures doing it. And so you see for him that there's an element that he's died to Christ, that Christ is always in front of him. Christ is always the first to be seen. And so I think that's very valuable. And so when we try to build relationships, we also are always trying to put forward the fact that we are doing it in the name of Jesus Christ, that Jesus Christ is the one whom we love. And so there's a surrendering in that. There's a handing over of ourself to say, my life is in the context of the life of Jesus Christ. And so that's the second stage, is that everything we do, we surrender it over to God. It's easy for me to come in with an agenda, or for me to come in with a plan, or for me to form my own plan, but if I don't surrender it over to God, it's worthless. It'll only be, I don't know if you can hear that, it's the 4th of July. It'll only be, anyways, all right, I got to keep going here. It'll only have value as long as I surrender it over to God. So when we form relationships, but they're not of God, they're just something earthly, then the love is very small. The love is very small because it's confined to earth. But when we love with Jesus Christ, it blossoms, it grows, it expands out into heaven, into eternity, and it becomes something that's going to be everlasting. And we can't even comprehend here on earth just how magnificent and how magnanimous that is. So that's the second stage, is surrendering it to Jesus. Sometimes people become very lonely and they go through these stages of grief, of denial and anger and bargaining and depression, but they really want love, they really want intimacy in their life, but they don't surrender it to Jesus. And so they form relationships that are not of Jesus. It's very common in our culture today for people to be living together and they're not married, and so they didn't surrender that relationship over to Jesus. And because of it, the love is actually very small. It's confined. And I'm wondering if the reason we're struggling so much with divorce in our culture today is because too many of us have not surrendered our relationships over to Jesus. And so they fall apart, they break. The third is with the gospel, the third stage of building relationships and building love. And so it sounds almost the opposite, because what Jesus says in the gospel today is a challenge, but it's something that I think lends itself to, again, this notion of how we build relationships. And so Jesus says, if anyone loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And it sounds like Jesus is saying that we now have to only have a limited amount of love and we have to compete. So we give the first love to God, and then whatever is left we can give to our family and friends. But that's not what he's saying. Sometimes I think people feel that way because they feel like the amount of love they have is limited. And so they choose father or mother over God. They choose their son or daughter over God. A modern example is, kids' sports. They're going to choose their kids over church. They're going to choose their kid over religion. They're going to choose their kids over their parish community because their kid has sports on Sundays, because they have a tournament, because they want to travel as a family, whatever it is. Very common right now, people asking for dispensations from Sunday Mass because they're going to Disneyland or they're going on vacation. And I guess I'm kind of a jerk about it. I don't give them dispensation because I say, you need to take Jesus with you. And sometimes people say, well, the vacation we planned, we can't. And they say, well, I just ask the question, is Jesus worth it? Is he important enough for you to maybe even change your vacation plans? And so Jesus is asking the question, or he's making the statement that when we choose other things over him, then we've, in a sense, destroyed any sense of a real relationship with God. God is just, he's like that little bobblehead doll that you stick on your dash, right? And he's there, but you could just as easily remove him. I don't know where I came up with that example, but anyways, I just thought of that. And so we want him to be obviously a lot more than that. And so the reality is by faith, that when we do put God first, when we refuse to allow anything to be before our relationship with God, that God then amplifies our ability to love our neighbor. He amplifies our ability to love our father and mother and son and daughter. And we love them far more. We love them in the context of eternity in heaven and everything else, not just our little tiny love here on earth. And so that is the third step, is that by faith we love God first, and then God amplifies our love for everyone else. And so we'll just review these three steps. So the first is, remember to build a relationship before we try to go to work, before we try to do anything per se, we build a relationship. And then the second is we surrender it over to God. And the third is that we love God first and more than anything, and then He colors everything. He amplifies our love in everything. We're celebrating the 4th of July, actually today. I'm recording it today, Tuesday on the 4th of July. And in our culture, we've really mixed up freedom what used to be considered slavery is now considered freedom, and what considered freedom is now considered slavery. And so this morning in the daily mass readings, we had one of the readings about Sodom and Gomorrah and how God's getting ready to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah and because of their wickedness. And I would bet if you had gone and talked to those folks and said, hey, do you think you're really wicked? They would have said no. And they would have said, no, we're free. We're free to do as we please. And that speaks to our culture today. We have more and more, it feels like chaos and anarchy. And that's because everybody's only answering to themselves. Their freedom is only determined by their self-desires. And so their love that they have in their life is actually very, very small, because it's just confined to themselves. And that impacts the culture, because then the culture just becomes more and more chaotic when everybody's just seeking after their own interests, and it becomes more and more like Sodom and Gomorrah. And so that's considered freedom today, whereas for us as Christians, that's considered slavery, because you're enslaved to isolation. You're enslaved to yourself. And so these 3 steps of freedom, these 3 steps of relationship actually really are 3 steps towards freedom, to be able to truly love with complete freedom in that. And then vice versa is what today is considered slavery, to be a person of faith, to be a person of religion, to be confined to the rules of God. They're considered slavery to our world, but actually that's the path of freedom. Then we get to truly be who God called us to be. All right, I hope you have a wonderful 4th of July. God bless you, and I'll see you next week.